What's frightened me most this year, though, about our approach to China was that up until the Chinese left container loads of fresh Australian lobster on the tarmac at Shanghai Pudong Airport, the Australian government was not convinced that Beijing was using our trade deals to punish us. It was only after 6 different produce sectors were banned or copped unreasonable tariffs that the likes of Trade Minister Simon Birmingham and Agriculture Minister David Littleproud started to confirm their suspicions. Now, that is a real worry because it tells us that the government has been blind to China's intentions for too long and has been giving Beijing the benefit of the doubt in all circumstances. As we now know, that is extremely dangerous. And if they think China's new fishing plan in the Torres Strait is legitimate, they are greater fools than the Chinese think they are. This is about control and it's about access. For Beijing to announce that China is building a $200 million major fishing port on Australia's doorstep in the village of Daru is not a coincidence. There is no fish to catch in this area. It's also the closest PNG town to Australia. Earlier today, the Agriculture Minister was sounding less likely to take the Chinese on face value.
Ministerial level, we continue to have our hand out, ready to talk. We won't turn our back. The best way to resolve any issue is through dialogue, whether that be internationally or even at home. So we'll continue to do that, but we will not compromise on our values or principles or our sovereignty. There are hundreds of thousands of Australians who lost their lives protecting that, and any nation around the globe that thinks Australia will ever relent on that, they are truly and surely mistaken.
That is a lot more serious than we've heard David Littleproud on anything that has come out of China, thankfully. But so much for Papua New Guinea's close relationship with Australia. So much for the $14 billion in aid we give them each year. Talk about selling out. The Chinese have selected an area for so-called fishing that no one fishes in because you don't catch fish there. And this also needs to be viewed in the context of how aggressive and intimidating its patriotic fishing fleet is around the world, flanked, of course, by their armed Chinese Coast Guard Navy. Its fleets have been implicated in a spate of wrecks carrying dead North Korean fishers washing up on Japan's shores. Its ships have been caught crossing into the heritage-listed Galapagos Islands Nature Reserve. As news.com.au reported today, the patriotic fishing fleet is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party and trained to assist the People's Liberation Army. These fleets helped China seize Philippines territory in the South China Sea. We need to wake up and see this for what it really is, not what the PNG government thinks it may be. China is clearly ratcheting up its aggression against Australia by taking a stake in waters owned and occupied by only PNG and Australian vessels. They are picking a fight. And this poses ramifications for Australia way beyond what they've inflicted in trade terms. This is unacceptable and extremely dangerous. Australia needs to react to these plans quickly before we have the Chinese fishing militia stationed just a couple of 100 kilometres from our northern coast. Well, this is a real worry as well. A data leak has confirmed that the Australian consulate based in Shanghai is among at least 10 diplomatic missions with Chinese Communist Party members employed in senior positions. An investigation by Sky News host Shari Markson in The Australian has revealed some of the Communist Party members have been employed in the consulates for nearly 2 decades. Now, the concern here is obvious, a breach of protocol and a risk to Australia's national security. Let's cross live to Shari Markson right now. Shari, thank you very much for your time.
Good evening, Chris. How are you?
I'm very well. Let's go through this carefully. How hidden were these documents? How difficult were they to get hold of?
Well, as we understand it, this is the first leak ever of such a significant register of Chinese Communist Party members. 1.95 million members. It has their personal details from their national ID number, their birth date, their ethnicity. Even in some cases, it has their phone number, and we were able to call people on this list to verify that it was them. It's never happened before that there has been such a leak. It's from the Shanghai region. It was from Chinese dissidents who physically extracted the data from the server
in an office building in Shanghai, and it made its way via the Interparliamentary Alliance on China into the hands of journalists to investigate, to analyse. There were 4 media organisations that have looked at this database over the past 2 months. The Australian was one of them, and the findings so far, the examination into this could be endless. The findings so far have been quite extraordinary.
So what's the theory here? Do we think that the vetting process has been inadequate and so Communist Party members have become staffers in, say, the consulate in Shanghai? Or do they, once they become employees, do they become targets of the Communist Party? How does it work?
Look, there is no way of anyone officially knowing if someone is a Communist Party member without having the database, which we now have. But how it works is that the foreign consulates in Shanghai and DFAT and the other foreign agencies are required to hire local Chinese staff through a state-sponsored run, government agency, recruitment agency over there called the Shanghai Foreign Service Agency Department. So it's a recruitment agency there. And what we discovered through this database is that recruitment agency has 12 Communist Party branches and has 249 Communist Party members linked to it. And then we were able to trace back those members because they're listed on the database and find them now working in 10 Western consulates that are based in Shanghai, including Australia, New Zealand, the United States, British. We then went to all of those consul generals, or we went to the DFAT and the equivalent foreign affairs departments in each country for comment, and we sent them the listing in the database and their employee. So it has been quite a big revelation, to have the actual proof. It could be something that's suspected, that if you hire local Chinese nationals, that they could be linked to the Communist Party, but this is the database that actually proves it.
It's one thing to be beholden to the Communist Party in some of our consulates. It's another thing entirely to become a spy in the consulate. That would be the government's greatest fear, wouldn't it?
And that's something that the agencies will have to investigate. That's beyond the capabilities of a journalist. And of course, not all Communist Party members, are doing anything wrong at all. But it does raise the concern, and this is the concern that intelligence officers we've interviewed for this investigation expressed. They said it would be a serious national security risk and a breach of protocol, because potentially there is a conflict of interest. Potentially there are allegiances that could be called on, and it just depends what level of access to information the CCP members have.
And just very quickly, have you had any reaction from the Australian government or anyone representing the Chinese government, maybe through the Global Times?
Absolutely nothing from Foreign Minister Marise Payne. We've got a lot of concerned politicians after our report today, and we've interviewed them. That will be in the Australian newspaper tomorrow, but not a word from Foreign Minister Marise Payne. And there's a lot of politicians who we've interviewed who are unhappy about that. They think there needs to be an investigation. They're saying that they're going to launch an inquiry. If there isn't an explanation given from her about why we are continuing to use this agency that is installing Communist Party members in our agencies, in our foreign government agencies, working for us in Shanghai, potentially with access to sensitive information. And look, I have been very balanced here, I think, but just to give it some context, the British think tank, Henry Jackson Society, their spokesman, Samuel Armstrong, said this sounds like a well-organised spy ring. So, there are concerns about this.
Yeah, and understandably so. Shari Markson, well done. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Chris.